The shell cracked open after just a few pushes. Breath and light stretched it, and it felt its way free, escaping into the hatchery. Moments later, a larger pair of hands caught it, holding it close to its chest. It was carried into another room and placed in a row with a dozen others that looked identical. Its siblings were all looking up, mesmerized. It turned to see what they were staring at. The wall was covered with beautiful circles, lines, and colors. Concepts that had never existed before began to form in its mind. Gold on a field of blue, swirling and filling its vision. Thoughts pushed their way into its newborn mind. It was a creature of the wall, a Scribbler. The Great Mother had birthed it and awaited its service to the colony. It turned away from the wall, and as it did, waiting arms gently grabbed it. It was cradled by an older sibling, a nurseman. The nurseman carried it to the next room and placed it down. The hatchling looked around at the other newborns, who weren't sitting but moving about the large room, absorbing images from one wall after another. It followed their example, walking up to the first wall and staring at it. The patterns etched into its mind told a story of its people. A division formed immediately. Its people were smaller, hunted, and cast away. The larger ones, predators full of fangs and muscle, drove its people into hiding. They were large, devouring them. The small ones traveled to stars, hiding among the larger, successful colonies, growing and sending princesses to hide within other ships. Walls would be cut and hidden spaces created for the young. Elders recorded important events, strategies, and techniques that could benefit the colony. The struggle to grow while staying hidden continued for ages. The strategy for survival was to grow in secret, away from the larger ones. The hatchling absorbed the concepts, filling its fluid mind. It shook for a moment, then walked to the next wall. It focused its eyes and let the images play through its mind. This wall told a story about a different kind of larger and a colony faced with a difficult choice. The people had settled in vast and used chambers. A mother had nested there, and many workers had been born. Then, a new type of larger discovered one of their walls. It was vital to the colony, a record of records. Losing it would set their development back to the beginning. The elder male, rather than having the group scatter and hide, chose to defend the important wall. They fought back and won. Fear spread through the colony. Now the larger ones knew they existed, and they would soon be hunted. Yet no hunt came. The larger returned, offering food and lodging, and began the transition into the great colony of Twain. The young Scribbler looked around the room, placing his hands on the floor. He felt the vibrations of distant machines moving. A thought crossed his mind. Where are we? A nurseman glanced at him, smiling with a toothy grin and closed eyes. He moved the hatchling to the next wall and pointed. Look, brother, keep learning. The little Scribbler stared at the next wall as the glyphs formed images in its mind. It saw Scribblers battling in armored suits, lawyers battling in courts, and hovering trays filled with legal documents. Images of soldiers in combat flashed in its mind. It took a step back, looking down at its 2 hands and 4 legs. It crouched, flexing its fingers, imagining the crunch of bone through the metal suits of ancient knights. The nurseman knelt beside it. Are you all right? Yeah, but it hurts, the hatchling replied. The nurseman patted its head. Where does it hurt? The hatchling touched its chest. Here. I don't feel good. The nurseman pulled back slightly. Why do you think it hurts there? The hatchling looked up at him. I didn't like thinking about killing those creatures. The nurseman smiled, showing all his teeth. That's good. At least you know you don't want to be a knight. The hatchling shook its head. No, I don't want that. It stared at the nurseman. But I get to choose, right? Of course, little one. Let's finish this room first. I want you to see all the guilds. Then, I'll take you to meet the colony. The nurseman patted the hatchling on the head. We're all eager to see which guild you wish to join. The hatchling turned and walked toward the next wall of glyphs. 3 walls later, The hatchling hopped over to the nurseman. "Finish the room. Can we go meet the colony now?" The nurseman looked around at the dozen other nursemen and hatchlings. "Yes, they're not all ready yet, but I'll take you now." He lowered his arm around the hatchling and picked it up. "Come on. I bet you're hungry too." The hatchling clapped its hands. "Yes, I'm very hungry. What is there to eat?" The nurseman started down the hallway. "Well, there's all sorts to eat. We love to feed you little ones. There are meats from 100 worlds, salads from plants grown in water or space stations, and some from dry, arid worlds. They crunch in your mouth." The hatchling squirmed in his arms. "Let's go. Let's go." The nurseman squeezed him tighter, patting his chest. "We're almost there." They entered a large, cavernous room. "Here we are," said the nurseman as he set the hatchling down. The little Scribbler looked out across the room. Hundreds of small ones like him were in the middle, fighting and eating from 100 bowls. He looked up and saw more elder Scribblers watching from the seating areas carved into the walls. The hatchling stared at them as it walked toward the food fight. It paused, watching the others scramble for pieces of meat and fruit. It grabbed an empty bowl, holding it tightly to its chest. It carefully dodged a fight over a piece of leg meat as large as itself, reaching over 2 contenders and pulling a strip off the leg to add to its bowl. It walked through the mess of salad and hatchlings eating off the floor, picking a few red fruits and green leaves to add to the meat strip. A piece of food flew through the air, nearly hitting it, but the hatchling made its way to a corner of the room where it sat down to eat. It shivered with the first bite, salivating as a wave of pleasure filled its body. It wanted to devour the entire bowl but restrained itself, taking one small bite at a time. After finishing, it returned to refill the bowl, pulling different meats and fruits from around its fellow hatchlings. It sat in its corner, eating and observing. By the time it finished its 4th bowl, an elder opened a gate at the room's edge and stepped in. "Hello, young ones. Welcome to life." Hundreds of hatchling eyes looked up at him. The young one in the corner took another bite and watched him. "I am a representative of the Knights of Twain. I've seen in many of you the fire and drive needed to be a soldier. I stand here before you to ask, would any of you be willing to serve your people in combat?" Dozens of hands shot up. The elder walked through the crowd, patting their heads. "Come then, there's more food to be had. I'll take you to the temple to begin your training." The elder turned, and the volunteers eagerly followed. The hatchling took another bite, watching the elders, and looked at the glyphs carved beneath each seating area. The images flooded his mind as he absorbed them. Lawyers, nurses, knights, explorers, and builders. None of them appealed to him. The hatchling sat and ate, watching as one elder after another came down and took groups of hatchlings. The nursemen kept bringing more in to feed and select from. Eventually, another night elder came and took another 20. Still, the hatchling sat, eating and watching.